Okay, well, thanks to Eduardo and the CAP Student Advisory Council for inviting me to do this. As he said, I did this one last year, and I also actually gave it to the graduate students here at my own university earlier this year. So I guess after this time, it's going to be recorded though, so I won't be able to give it again. So thank you for that, Eduardo, for cutting off the talk, but that's fine. Okay, so my name is Ivan Booth. I'm a professor here at Memorial University. And I guess there's sort of what I'm kind of talking about in this talk, it's, as title is, things I didn't know as a grad student, is I want to talk a little bit about, grad school is really pretty different from undergrad. And maybe going from undergrad, you don't really know what you're getting into. One of the other things about grad school is, and I've seen this both as when I was a student, among me and my friends, but also since I've been a professor supervising students, grad school is a very stressful time. And so I want to talk a little bit about that, just so that, I don't have any magic solutions for the stress because it is an inherently stressful thing, but maybe just knowing that it's stressful for pretty much everyone, and we're going to see a lot of evidence of that. We'll have observational evidence from the number of cartoons that have been, webcomics that have been written about stress in grad school. So it's a very common experience. And so, it is stressful, but maybe it's useful to know, it's not just you, and to think a little bit about what some of the aspects of that are. And then at the very end, I'm going to talk a little bit about things. I have some concrete advice about things to do with conferences. Okay, so now let me see if I can, oh, here we go. So anyone who's familiar with the 80s and 90s can see some signs of the time period here. If you look up, actually you can probably see my cursor now. If you look down just to my right, you can see a Garfield cartoon. And up in the top right-hand corner, there's a Rush poster, which was the Rush poster of one of my friends who are very kind of classic 80s and 90s band. So anyway, this picture was taken after, it was the last day of undergrad. So what had happened is we'd written all of our exams, and we were way behind on writing our honors projects. And so after exams, we spent a week basically straight in this room writing. And so if you look down in the bottom on the left of the screen, you can see there's a light on. And if you look in the window, you can see it sort of looks kind of half light, because what had happened is we just worked all night. So this was Thursday night going into Friday morning. And what I'm holding there is my honors thesis as it was finished. And if you look at that that envelope on the desk next to the light, there's a yellow envelope there. That's the envelope I was about to stick my honors thesis in. And then I'm going to drive to my supervisor's house on the way home, stick it in his mailbox, and ask him to read it within that morning. And then I was going to come back in at 10:30 to make my corrections. So this is like a terrible idea. This is not what you should do to your supervisor. But anyway, this is what I did back in 1995. And the timing was really tight, because following this, I had Sunday morning, I was leaving on a really early flight. I was flying to England, and then I was going on to Germany, and me and my friends were traveling across Asia. So I only had I had no time at all. So this was me finishing undergrad, not really thinking about how things should work. So that said, after that summer of traveling, just so you sort of know my background, I started grad school at the University of Waterloo. And I was there from 1995 until the summer of 2000. I was from Newfoundland. I live in Newfoundland now. I grew up in Newfoundland. And while I was in Waterloo, I kind of, as many people do who go to different places, I lived with lots of people who were from Newfoundland or the Atlantic provinces. We were kind of it was a Newfoundland house, a Newfoundland Atlantic provinces house. While I was in grad school, I met my wife there, who was also doing a master's degree in physics at the same time as me when we started. And yeah, so then I finished in 2000. We got married in 1998. And then I did one postdoc, and then I got a job back in Newfoundland. So that's kind of where things come from. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about is you get lots of advice when you're an undergrad or at different times from different people. And not all of that advice is good. So I'm going to give a couple of pieces of bad advice that I know personally that people got. So the first one is me. So in 1995, there was two separate professors at at my university who both told me, well, this was one particular one, but another one said something similar. Don't waste your time with general relativity. It's a dead field. Now, at the time, the professor was giving this as sincerely intended advice. And I think he, from his perspective, actually, it seemed true at the time, because at the time, general relativity, which is what I studied and I was going to study, was a kind of a very theoretical field. And not much seemed to have happened, right? It was kind of people did calculations, maybe there wasn't really much connection with reality. But of course, what he didn't know is even then, there was the beginnings of the gravitational wave observatories. We were only 4 years at this stage from the discovery of that there was a cosmological constant from the expansion of the universe. And so, for example, in the last 6 years, 3 of the Nobel Prizes have been associated with general relativity. Now, I don't know that's necessarily a great measure of things, but it wasn't a dead field. So anyway, at the time, he sincerely believed it was a dead field. He thought he was giving me good advice. He was actually quite wrong in there. Then there was some advice. So 2 close friends from grad school, who are both now professors, the same person told them in 1994 and 1995, don't waste your time in grad school. You aren't smart enough to be a professor. And so, this person was also completely wrong. Okay, so, maybe the first thing is you don't necessarily need to listen to anything I'm about to say now. Anything I say now could be wrong because we have some examples there of bad advice. Okay, so I think this was in my abstract. This was another quote from another of my good friends, who, when we were in grad school, he used to call it the snooze button of life. And so basically the reasoning goes like this. You think you're finishing your undergrad degree in physics or mathematics or mathematical physics, and you think, well, I liked undergrad, did pretty well in it, courses went well, maybe I'll just continue. And, that's one reason to keep going. But if you're doing that, you need to recognize that things change pretty substantially between undergrad and grad. So in undergrad, you really just have your courses, right? And, one of the great things about undergrad is that, every 4 months, suddenly everything resets, right? You finish everything for, a few blissful weeks. You have absolutely nothing that you have to do. And then things start again. It's really hectic. It's stressful. You got a lot of stuff to do, but you just got to get those courses done. And then maybe in the summers, you do a little bit of, maybe you do some research in the summers or work some other job. But in grad school, it's pretty different. So in grad school, and I guess I'm going to talk mainly, well, I'll talk about masters and PhDs, these are kind of the aspects of things that happen when you're a grad student. You have courses to do. If you're doing a PhD, you have a comprehensive exam you have to do. You have TAs, you have tutorials that you have to do. You have some research to do. And maybe you've got some professional development, like maybe you do some courses about teaching or presentations or these kinds of things, right? So there's kind of 5 aspects. And, one of the things that is complicated is as you're doing these things, to sort of the order of like when you have to do things. So by deadlines, while you're doing your coursework, there's assignments coming in. They're probably, assignments weekly or bi-weekly or tri-weekly assignments like an undergrad. Maybe you have midterms, your final exams. So those things have to be done. The tutorials, you're getting paid for them. That's happening every week. That's very fixed. You have to get them done. You have to get the marking done, or you have to get prepared for the tutorials. And these are things all have to be done. If you're doing a PhD, you got this huge looming deadline of you have to do your comprehensive exam. And that is, for many people, one of the most stressful things in their entire life. One of my PhD students just did her comprehensive exam a couple of weeks ago, and I was talking to her a few days ago, and she looks so much happier now than she did before the comprehensive exam, right? So this is a huge stressful thing. Then, so you've got those things, then you got your research. Now, your research doesn't have fixed deadlines because it's kind of more amorphous. You have to get things done, but if you get it done today or tomorrow, maybe it doesn't matter so much, or at least that's how it seems. And then, maybe if you have time, you take a couple of courses about teaching or something like that, or a couple of seminars about it. So that's the importance by deadlines. The other thing that happens, so those are kind of your academic deadlines, but you also have your funding, right? Because you get paid as a grad student. And in order to get your funding, one of the most important things is the courses and the comps, because usually if you fail your courses or you fail your comprehensive exams, then you get kicked out of the program. So, that's critical to get that done. Your TAs, it is possible, if you do a really bad job on TAs, then you don't get them anymore. And that's maybe like at our university, that's a third of your income if you don't get your TAs. So there's a lot of, you've got to get those things done. Research, well, it doesn't actually usually directly affect your funding unless you really annoy your supervisor and they cut you off. And then this professional development is kind of near the end. And then I guess I lump two things together. Okay, so that's for funding. Okay, so that's your life in grad school. You're worried about the academic deadlines. You're worried about keeping the money coming in so you can eat. Okay, now, but then if you are thinking about what's going to happen after university, the order of importance is pretty different. So the first thing that matters is research. How many papers you write is the key thing for getting a postdoc or getting an academic job afterwards. The second most important thing is your research, because that is just more important than anything. Third most important thing is your research again, right? So it's completely critical to have those papers, right? If you don't have the papers from your PhD, you won't get a postdoc. If you don't have the papers from your postdoc, it's going to be pretty hard to get a professional professor position. And then fourth is your tutorials and your professional development. When you apply for jobs, there's often a teaching component and you need to have some evidence of teaching. So if you notice there, in terms of the importance later on, courses does not appear at all. At least in North America, nobody cares what you did on your courses, right? If you apply for a postdoc, where they just don't even look at your courses. If you were applying for a professor, they don't care about your courses. Your comps, how well if you flew through your comps or whether you just barely scraped through, no one ever knows afterwards, right? So, but you've got an inherent tension here. You have a tension between the things that you have to do immediately and the long-term things. Okay. So let's think a bit about research, since it's probably the most important thing. And I've got another sort of anecdote here about the research. It was actually when I was going to give that talk last year, the Canada, Cuba, America, Mexico conference. And I was walking in that morning and I was like, I hadn't quite finished this, so I'm still a little bit like that person in 1995 who was writing his honors thesis, finish his honors thesis the night before. So, and I just happened to run into a friend on the way in, and he said, I was telling what I was about to do, and he was talking a little bit about research, and he said, and I guess this is a well-known quote, what is research? And it's like walking into a dark room looking for a light switch. And then I kind of elaborated on here, because often it turns out there isn't a switch. Sometimes there's not even a room. But sometimes there are a couple of pygmy rabbits, something completely unexpected. So this was Afric Solomon was the guy who gave me this quote, but he gave me the first line and then I kind of pushed it to silliness afterwards. But, I think it's true, right? So when you're and so this is very different. So when you're doing your coursework, if you have an assignment problem, you do, unless your professor has messed up the assignment problems, which of course happens, but assuming they haven't, assuming they've, properly prepared things, there's always going to be an answer. If you're doing research, you don't know there's always going to be an answer. You've got a problem you're working on. Maybe you're going to find a good answer for it. Maybe you're not going to find an answer. You just don't know, right? And so that's kind of, looking for the light switch is looking for the solution to that particular problem. But, sometimes there isn't a switch. And, of course, that is, stressful. And then I say, and then my thing, sometimes it's not even a room. So maybe turns out that the problem you were looking at isn't even like the problem you thought it was in the end, right? Along the way, when you find there's no switch, you realize there's actually also no walls in the room. Maybe some of the assumptions that you made just weren't there and things changed. And then sometimes something completely unexpected happens. And those are the pygmy rabbits. Okay. So this is very different. I just said a little bit of this. So this is all kind of stressful, especially if you're coming out of undergrad. And it takes lots of people a while to get used to this. Coming out of undergrad, you always know there's answers. Research, you don't. It's frustrating because quite often you will spend weeks or months working on something that just doesn't seem to work at all. You're just sort of banging your head against the wall. You don't know what's happening. And, you know, that's the way it is. And it doesn't have a right answer. So there are students, and I've supervised students who are used to doing, who were really, really good at doing their courses, but somehow it turns out that they're really fixated on there always has to be a right answer for things. And when you're in a situation where there isn't a right answer and you kind of have to formulate that answer yourself, then things don't work so well. So, you know, research doesn't always have a right answer. And I think, you know, just going back to my earlier thing, when I was talking about my friends who this professor told not to do grad school because they weren't smart enough, these people they're really smart people. Maybe they did well in their courses, but they weren't sort of like 95 people in their courses. Turns out that didn't matter, because getting the exact right answer in your coursework doesn't necessarily correlate to being able to good at research. And these people are really good researchers, but, you know, things are different. Things are different in undergrad and grad school. You have different goals. But of course, you know, and if you find those pygmy rabbits, that's a very rewarding thing, right? Because, you know, when you figure out research, and it's pretty exciting, right? You know, you've been working at things for months and months, you've been banging your head, things have gone wrong. If you're a theorist like me, maybe you've been trying to do some calculation, you've been working on it for months, and, you know, maybe you've just spent the last 6 weeks looking for a minus sign that you lost somewhere along the way, or a factor of 2. That's what I spend an awful lot of my time doing. But then you get the answer, and at that point, I mean, it's amazing, right? Because at that point, you know something that no one else has ever known, you know, in history often, right? So research can be incredibly exciting. And, you know, there's the beauty of how it all fits together. But, you know, most of the time, you spend your time in these other things, being stressed out, thinking, oh, I'm never going to get this done. It's so frustrating. I got to get this done because there's a deadline coming up. Then, you know, you have those brief moments when everything works. Okay, so that's one source. That's a source of, you know, a lot of difference between grad school and undergrad. The other thing about grad school is there's a lot of freedom. So even though you have some courses to do, there are less courses than an undergrad. Undergrad's very structured. You have your 5 courses you're doing, or your 6 courses, or maybe you're super ambitious and you're doing 7. And that pretty much just lays out your days, you've got to get all these things done. The assignments are coming in. It's always structured how you have to get stuff done. In grad school, you're doing less courses. You might be doing 2 courses. Occasionally, you might do 3. Most of the time, you'd be doing 1 or 0. And so without that continual external deadlines being set for you, you've got to figure out that time yourself. And so here's my example from grad school. If anyone has, you remember these monkeys and ladder problems, and they're always kind of confusing, right? You got this ladder, you got a monkey, you got some friction, and you're trying to figure out whether the ladder slides, or maybe it's like the monkey climbs up to a certain point and it slides. I can't remember exactly how it works. So when I was a first-year grad student, I was doing tutorials for, I guess they were engineers, and at first I thought, oh, first year stuff, I don't need to study, I don't need to prepare this, I'll just walk in and do it. Anyway, one of the, you know, the second or third tutorial, we had a monkey on a ladder problem, which I just had no idea how to do. I completely forgotten how to do it. And so this was an example of me screwing up my time management, because I should have spent some time reviewing it, right? But I thought, oh, I don't need to do that. So there's some time management. Okay, you got to learn to self-motivate. So again, someone's not going to be there pushing you all your time. Your supervisor quite likely has, you know, they've got teaching to do. They may have administrative duties. They may be, you know, organizing conferences, writing papers with other people, supervising any number of students. They're not going to be there all the time on your back telling you to do things, right? You can't expect that. You have to learn how to do things yourself. And that's different from undergrad, right? Undergrad is much more, you know, people telling you what to do all the time. So you have to sort of see that these things have to get done, and you have to learn to motivate yourself to get those done. And then the other thing you can do, and it's easy to slip into this, and lots of times in my life I've lost this, you got to get some balance between your work and the rest of your life. So it's easy to kind of think that, oh, well, I'll just work continuously for the next 3 weeks to get that done. And you can maybe do that for short periods of time, but you can't do it forever. And so you need to sort of figure out how you can get things done without killing yourself, right? And you've got to live your life. So this is the first of our cartoons. So the top there we have, what I thought would make me productive, which was like just working all the time. And what actually does is like not work, doing a lot of work, but, spending time doing other things as well. Okay. So I think I've got an example of things I do in my spare time. So when we came home to Newfoundland and got jobs, one of the things we did was we built this bread oven in our backyard. And so that's the thing on the left. And of course, that's exactly what it looks like here in Newfoundland at the moment, because it's always warm and sunny and leafy here in Newfoundland. It certainly was not snowing earlier today. Then the other thing I did was all the way, basically since I was in junior high school, I guess in grade 8, I do the martial art called Aikido, which I still do. And one of the ways I tend to balance my life, which maybe isn't the best way to do it, is I tend to do one or two things quite obsessively. So in that, you can see, obviously, you build a bread oven, you're probably a little bit obsessive about baking bread if you do that. And then I've spent, I still practice Aikido 4 or 5 times a week. So, that's one balance. I don't know if it's necessarily a healthy balance, but it works for me. And then we also like to do outdoors things. So this is me and my kids and my wife, who I met in grad school. She's a biochemistry professor, doing a hike from 2019, finishing a backpacking trip. So I actually work in a math department now, and Valerie works in a biochemistry department. So the thing we say is that we're both physicists, because all our degrees are actually in physics, but I pretend to be a mathematician, and she pretends to be a biochemist. Okay, so thinking about this stress, grad school is stressful. Those things are stressful, right? I mean, you're learning all these new things, you're trying to adapt to, you have all these pressures on you, but at the same time, these pressures are such that it's easy to let things slide, right? And you've got your whole future ahead of you, right? And as time goes on, maybe your papers are coming more slowly than you'd like, and you're like, oh, I don't know what's going to happen, right? And so, everybody, it's okay to be stressed out during grad school, right? Everyone feels stressed out. Everyone I knew in grad school felt some stress. All of my students have felt it. So, everyone feels it to some extent. People deal with it in different ways. There are a few people who can just like strive on this stress. There's some people who it can be debilitating, right? And so, people are going to feel it, and, some people will feel it more than others, but everyone's going to feel some of stress, and everyone's going to have to deal with it in their own way. And so I've got a whole bunch of these comics now from PhD comics. So if you are thinking of going to grad school, you're in grad school, and you've never seen PhD comics, have a look at them, because they're true, right? So I think this is Cecilia, she's one of the main characters. And so she's looking at her screen there. She says, wait, this doesn't look right. Then she says, there must be something wrong with this data. And which means there's something wrong with what I'm doing, which means there's something wrong with me. Grad school spiral of doubt. My data in life are insignificant, because she's so invested in this, that when things start to go wrong, or they seem to start to go wrong, it's just, catastrophic. But, it isn't really, right? The bigger scheme of things is probably later on that day, she's going to realize that there was a typo in there, or something wrong with one of the data sets got corrupted or something. But things can seem really, really bad. And, in the big scheme of things, it isn't. Things can recover. Now this is later on in her degree, right? When she's doing her PhD. And so she's thinking about, so there's a big thing when you're writing your thesis. So I should be writing. And she's at a meal with her friends. I should be writing. She's riding her bike. I should be writing. She gets an email from maybe it was probably, I don't know if it's a professor. You should be writing. And she's like, I know. And in the bottom there, it says, this message brought to you by that manuscript you're supposed to be writing. So, that's how things go. Oh, I've got another one. Because this is one that happens to everybody. And I can't remember this guy's name. It says, this research is impossible, right? So that's the stressful bit about the research, right? You think it can't get done. And then someone hands them a paper and it says, paper with the same title you were going to give your thesis. And now, so he switched from it's impossible to, somebody already did it. And that's, now, again, that's how it seems at the time. So now he's in a cycle of despair and sadness. Almost certainly, there's a whole series of these actually, but almost certainly later on, he realizes that what he thought was done wasn't exactly what was done. It was similar, and it wasn't quite as bad as he thought. Okay, and then that's the continuation of this, kind of day after day. He's stressing out about it. Okay, so that said, it is stressful, and for many people, so you go through the stress, and just by talking to your friends, talking to family, talking to support, it's you work your way through it. But sometimes it's too much, and sometimes people need professional help, and that's fine too. I've been a grad officer and I supervised lots of people and I had lots of friends, and it's very common for people to need some help to deal with this, right? Because it is a really hard time in grad. It can be a really hard time in grad school. Okay, now there's the other thing, imposter syndrome. So this kind of happens to almost everyone in different situations. And imposter syndrome, and again, I've got these I've got PhD comics. Really, I could have just done the whole thing. I could have just posted a bunch of PhD comics, but I guess it wouldn't really be a talk then. So Cecilia gets an email. Ding. Cecilia, would you be interested in getting involved in this prestigious project? And Professor Jones is her supervisor. And then she has the imposter syndrome attack. I can't do this. I'm not a real expert. I don't know anything. What is he thinking? She's kind of breathing heavily. And then she says, oh, Professor Jones sounds interesting. I'd be happy to get involved. And I guess the nib is kind of grinding her teeth, I think. And then she says, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm an imposter. And then her good side, good conscience, bad conscience kind of comes out. Poof, you're not an imposter, Cecilia. Think how much you've accomplished. And then the other side. Yeah, but how much of it was luck or circumstance? She says, who are you guys? And they say, we're like Gollum from The Lord of the Rings, but for overachievers. And that kind of keeps on going. You're not an imposter, Cecilia. And the other person says, yeah, right. Look how far you've come. Look, think of everything you've done. It wasn't that hard. Consider your accomplishments. Anyone could have done them. All the awards you've won, if only they knew. And then it's like, well, at least you're good at feeling like an imposter. She said, I'm just okay at it. And then they are again. So Cecilia, it's perfectly normal to feel like an imposter. The imposter syndrome is actually very common among highly competent, successful people. It's a well-known phenomenon. So the fact that I feel like an imposter means I'm not an imposter? She says, statistically, yes. And the other person says, I'm not sure that's how statistics work. You see how you're doing it again. So, this is incredibly common, right? Everybody feels this at different times. So like I said, I've spent a lot of time in science. I've also spent a lot of time doing Aikido, doing this martial art. And I've seen then, similarly in science, you switch to different dojos at different times in your life. Maybe you move to places. And, when someone new moves to a new place for the first little while, they're like, oh, things are a little bit different. You think, oh, everyone knows more than me for a while. And then you realize, no, it's not. Same thing, from going from grad school, going from undergrad to grad school, suddenly you're with a whole new set of people. They are, these are people who are in grad school rather than just being people who are just going to maybe do a major and then continue on with other parts of their life, which, is completely fine. And so people are more competitive, they work harder, and it's often, at the beginning, you think, oh, no, all these people around me, they all know more than me. And then in your research group, at some point, everyone's the new person in the research group. All the people who've been around for a few years, they seem to know everything. You think, oh, how will I ever know as much as them? How will I ever know as much as the professor? And it's just basically time, right? There's no, everybody gets there. Everybody goes through this at the beginning. Everybody feels at some point like, they're not, somehow they just kind of lucked into it, as Cecilia was kind of thinking there. And that, it's incredibly common, right? I've again, I was a grad student. I've been a supervisor. I've been a graduate officer. I've seen this a lot. Almost everyone goes through this. There's a few people who are like completely confident in themselves all the time. They don't necessarily, maybe they don't actually know as much as they think. There's a few people like that. But, everyone kind of goes through this. Okay. So now I'm going to just talk about a couple of details, like what kind of a very specific case. which is talking about conferences. So again, this is one of the sources of stresses. When you're getting ready for your first conference or your second conference, or maybe later on even, it's really worrying, right? You're going to stand up in front of lots of people and talk about stuff. And who knows what's going to happen. And so here, again, I've forgotten the name of the other person. He says, "So are you ready for your talk?" And Cecilia says, "I think so. I got my laptop, my laser pointer. I got my backups of multimedia presentation on CD-ROM and USB memory stick. I got a hard copy transparency version just in case." And then her friend says, "Yes, but are you ready for your talk?" And she says, "Don't think so. Even the butterflies in my stomach are throwing up." So, going into this is pretty stressful, right? You think you're going to stand up. But one of the things that's always true when you're giving a talk at a conference is your audience knows way less than you think. So especially when you're a starting grad student, two things happen when you're preparing for a talk as a result of you thinking your audience knows more. One, most beginning grad students just assume their audience is an expert in what they're talking about and they know everything. And so they pitch their talk the wrong way because they think everybody knows everything and they're really worried about showing that they know stuff themselves. And sorry, what was my other bit on that? They pitch it the wrong way, and also, they're kind of really worried about how it's going to go over, right? And so then they sort of assume that they can just say things and people are going to understand. So this is a nice comic. This one is XKCD. Silicate chemistry is second nature to us geochemists. So it's easy to forget that the average person probably only knows the formulas for olivine and one or two feldspars. And then the other person says, "And quartz, of course." And she says, "Of course." So even when they're trying to compensate for it, experts in anything wildly overestimate the average person's familiarity with their field. And so that's the same. When you are a grad student, if you are talking about some research you've done, you're almost certainly the person in the room who knows the most about it, the most about the details, right? So, you don't go in there with thinking everyone's going to just look at what you wrote down. And remember, if it took you months to do it, almost no one is going to be able to figure it out in a few minutes, unless they basically worked on very close things and they have, years and years of experience. But if so, that's because they have that experience. No one is smart enough to figure out something that took you months in a span of say 10 minutes or 15 minutes, right? That's just not the way the world works. And they know less than you think, right? So all those things that you've struggled over, learning details of your research, almost no one in the audience is going to know that, unless it's an incredibly specialized audience. The other thing is the people, the professors that you're really scared about, and maybe they're professors that you need to talk to in order to, you think about, I need a postdoc, I have to talk to this person, or, all these people that you've read their papers, you've seen their names, you sort of think of them as being kind of famous, well-known and stressful. They're basically just older versions of you and your friends. And I can guarantee you this is the case because I know there's several of my friends from grad school who are still in the field. And I remember sitting down with them at, having a beer at conferences back, 25 years ago. And I was stressing about, I've got to go and talk to this person. What am I going to do? Blah, 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 blah. And then, later on, 25 years later, and, you're sitting around with those same people talking to them, and you realize that there's someone who wants to come and talk to you and they're really stressed out about it, right? And so, they have the same professors. They're not like this different breed of people. They are really you and your friends, 25 years from now. And most of them a lot of them will be worried about their talks. I mean, when I go to a conference to give a talk, I'm often kind of worried about it, leading up to it. But, one of the differences is people that they've known for 20 or 25 years are a good chunk of the audience, right? So, it's a lot more relaxing, right? Because you know a lot of people. It's like anything. Once you know people, things are less stressful. The other thing is, and this is kind of maybe when you're at the conference and you're thinking about asking a professor something about their research, and maybe you're really stressed about talking about their research to them, is, everybody likes to talk about their own work. So almost certainly, if you went up to any professor and asked them about their work, they're going to be more than delighted to talk about it because people like to talk about their own stuff, right? There's a few jerks out there, right? But, most people aren't. And in fact, sometimes these professors say you're in a room with, it's one of these kind of social functions at it. and you're thinking, oh, should I go over and talk to that person, to that professor? I'm kind of a bit worried about it. You know, almost certainly if they're standing by themselves at their time, they're like thinking, oh, I wish I was talking to someone. And if you go over and talk to them, they're going to be more than happy to talk to you, right? So, you know, that's something to think about, right? These aren't different beings, right? These are the same kind of people. They have the same kind of worries. They're just older. You know, and this is just something that works for me. Is over the years, I've learned that you know, maybe the most stressful time is leading up to about when you're going to start giving the talk. But then once you start giving it, things sort of seem okay. Because once you start doing it and you've prepared and you're talking about things you know, then it's pretty easy to continue. So, you know, you just got to make it through. So, you know, my way of doing it, which isn't always the best way, but my way of doing it is I write my talk and I just don't really think about it. In the, you know, lead up to the talk, I just don't really think, I consciously don't think about it until I'm up in front of the audience. Okay, so this is kind of, I mean, this is just kind of another of these random comics, but this one's a pretty nice one about your conference presentation. So, and this is just kind of pointing out that conference presentations never go as you hope they would, right? So this person, they started out was like, okay, they're going to introduce themselves. They're going to do the outline of their talk. Then there's going to be a nice motivation. It was going to be methodology and experiment design. It's going to be results, conclusions. There's a pause where everyone applauds, and then the engaging question and answers, right? And that was going to be 15 minutes. So what really happens is the previous speaker runs late and eats into your time. Technical difficulties connecting your laptop. So, you know, that we had that today, right? I had technical difficulties getting my slides showing. You forget to introduce yourself. There was a bunch of stuff at the beginning of this talk I forgot to say. No point going back now. We just got to keep going. Then you spend way too much time describing your outline. I usually don't do outlines, as I didn't this time, so this doesn't usually happen to me. Maybe I should do outlines, though. That's what most people do. They start working on the motivation, you know, where the motivation was supposed to be. Can't finish it. There's not enough time. Oh, so partway through the motivation, the annoying audience member interrupts with self-aggrandizing question. This can happen. That's one of the jerks. Finishing the motivation at this stage, they're right at the end. Realize you only have 3 minutes left. Power through the rest of your 30 slides. And then instead of the engaging question and answer, there's the awkward silence question and answer, where no one asks a question. And, you know, almost certainly what part of the reason maybe no one would ask a question is you ended up, and this happens to everybody all the time, happens to me, happens to other people I know, you ended up pitching your talk too high, right? You assumed everybody knew stuff. And you ended up talking, and, you know, maybe partway through the presentation, you're looking around and you think, oh, I've lost everybody. No one's paying attention now. Well, I guess I'll just have to keep going because that's all I can do at this stage. Maybe that's happening at the moment. I can't see your faces. Maybe you've all turned off at this stage. Okay. So I got a summary here now, and I've got another imposter syndrome one, which is Among Us, the academic edition. So I guess this is, you know, maybe a couple of years ago, but I guess a lot of you guys would have played Among Us. And so I think this guy is I think he's a senior grad student. He says, someone in our group is an imposter. And then everybody says, it's me. I'm the imposter. You know, I don't belong here. So that's just kind of emphasizing how everyone kind of has this idea, right? Everybody's worried about it. Oh, and that was the summary. I thought there was going to be something happening there. Okay, so I guess I am done there, Eduardo. I'm going to stop sharing. Thought I had an extra slide, but I guess I didn't.
Awesome. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Well, thank you, Dr. Booth, for that wonderful talk. Wonderful presentation. I think my favorite part was reminding us that we are all human. Is only difference is that some of us have been around for longer. And so that concludes the talk, which means we move to the question and answer. And before that, of course, I would like to invite you to connect with us to our website and social media with the links that I'll share in the chat. And with that, I will stop the recording.